Just check the date on your phone. It is exactly March 9, 2026.
Right.
And you might be listening to this on your commute. Maybe you're at your desk or, just making coffee, thinking today is just an ordinary Monday. But I am looking through this massive stack of declassified security logs, and there's an anomaly discovered exactly 10 years ago that entirely changes the context of this specific day.
It really does, because if we go back to 2016, researchers were doing routine server maintenance at the Svalbard Global Seed Vault in Norway. And for those who don't know, this is a highly secure facility. It is literally buried in permafrost.
Yeah, built to survive basically anything.
Exactly. And crucially, its internal inventory network is completely air-gapped. It is disconnected from the outside internet, yet technicians found a stray 4-megabyte text file sitting in a directory that hadn't been accessed in years.
Right, and it wasn't just garbage data. The file contained impossibly accurate global crop yield predictions for the coming decade. It warned of specific, highly localized climate events. I mean, it predicted the Sahel droughts and the massive Mekong Delta flooding, which we now know actually happened. But the file also spoke of something it called seed sovereignty failures.
And to put seed sovereignty failures into plain English for you, the document wasn't just talking about bad harvests. It was describing a structural shift where the proprietary genetic modifications of corporate agriculture essentially overwrite the natural reproduction of foundational crops.
Like a biological copyright strike.
That's a great way to put it. It's a biological copyright strike executed on the very genetic code of the food we rely on to survive. Now, we are simply reporting what was in the file, not taking a stance on the agricultural industry, but the document described a systemic collapse of independent agriculture. But the detail in that file that truly anchors our entire analysis today is the internal digital timestamp.
Yeah, this is the part that gives me chills.
The date the document claimed to be generated from was March 9th, 2026. Today. Right now.
And that brings us to the mission of this deep dive. We are not just looking at a single glitch on a Norwegian server. We have a huge stack of historical anomalies here. We've got recently unsealed classified documents and bizarre medically documented testimonies spanning from the year 1638 all the way up to 2019. We are going to synthesize this physical evidence to examine a pattern that forces a complete reevaluation of linear time.
Because when we map all of these data points against our digital backdrop of interconnected historical timelines, the most unsettling realization isn't merely that time travel or temporal displacement might exist. The real issue is the convergence.
The fact that they all point to one spot.
Precisely. Almost all of these impossible historical incursions, these artifacts and accidental travelers, are pointing toward a singular critical nexus point. They are all warning about one specific year, and that year is 2026.
Okay, let's unpack this paper trail first. Because it's one thing to find a dusty manuscript that predicts the future with vague, poetic language. We've all seen Nostradamus interpretations where people bend the words to fit modern events.
Right, pattern recognition.
Exactly. But what we are looking at in the Kyoto Scroll isn't a vague prophecy. It reads like a technical manual sitting in the wrong century. I was looking through the translation logs of this document, which was discovered in a wooden chest in 1987. It was wrapped in perfectly preserved silk and carbon dated flawlessly to the early Edo period, around 1638.
Written by a Buddhist monk.
Yeah, a monk. But buried deep inside his philosophical musings are highly technical descriptions of the years 2025 through 2027. He described devices holding the sum of human knowledge in the palm of your hand. More incredibly, he detailed physicians treating illnesses not with medicine, but by rewriting the body's own instructions, which is a surgically precise description of modern mRNA and targeted gene therapy.
What's fascinating here is the linguistic struggle visible in the calligraphy itself. The translation logs showed that the monk was actively trying to explain phenomena that his 17th century vocabulary simply could not accommodate. He couldn't just write internet. Linguists found that he had to invent completely novel compound words in classical Japanese to describe what he called the invisible web.
Hold on, so he is essentially forcefully evolving his own language, creating new vocabulary from scratch, just because his 17th century brain couldn't process the concept of a global Wi-Fi network.
Exactly. It's a structural linguistic strain visible right there in the ink. He was trying to document a reality his world had no framework for. He also wrote extensively about a silent war, where nations attack each other through these invisible networks to destroy societal trust, essentially outlining modern cyber warfare. But his most urgent warning was what he termed a crisis of authenticity. He explicitly wrote about a period where machines would create art, literature, and voices indistinguishable from human work. He warned that this would cause the population to lose the ability to trust reality itself. That is a surgical diagnosis of the generative AI landscape we are navigating today.
That concept actually perfectly bridges into the Vienna letter from 2019 because we see that exact same anxiety about artificial intelligence, but with physical evidence that completely breaks our understanding of causality.
The postal room anomaly.
Yeah, the Vienna post office. Construction workers in Vienna were renovating a decommissioned sorting facility. They broke through a concrete wall into a room that had been officially sealed since 1997. Inside, sitting on a sorting table, was an 11-page handwritten letter. No postage, no return address. The date written clearly at the top was January 4, 2026.
And the contents were incredibly specific.
Very. The author casually described AI systems making fully autonomous decisions in financial markets and military logistics. They detailed very specific semiconductor trade tensions between Western nations and East Asian hubs that are literally in the headlines this morning.
And the forensic analysis of that letter by the University of Vienna is what makes it impossible to dismiss as a hoax. The materials fundamentally contradict the timeline. The paper stock utilized manufacturing processes and chemical bleaches that literally did not exist in the global supply chain before 2023.
So the paper itself was from the future.
Yes. The specific synthetic polymers in the ink formula weren't commercially available until 2024. Furthermore, the handwriting was mixed with modern grammatical constructions and slang that hadn't entered mainstream German usage until 2025. Physically and chemically, that letter could not have been written when it was discovered.
The physics of how information travels backwards like that ties directly into another bizarre anomaly in our stack, the Zurich equation.
Right, the Dressler paper.
Yeah. This was a paper submitted to the Annals of Physics in 1961 by an unknown Swiss physicist named Werner Dressler. It was rejected for being nonsensical and sat in an archive for 60 years. But when a doctoral student reviewed it in 2023, she realized Dressler hadn't written nonsense. He had accurately mapped out the mathematical framework for quantum computing error correction.
A technological breakthrough that wasn't officially announced until 2024.
Exactly. Dressler built his entire equation around a concept he called information coherence decay.
To put information coherence decay into perspective for you, imagine trying to hold a perfect, highly detailed image in your mind, but every single second, a tiny pixel of that image burns out. In quantum computing, the qubits that hold data are incredibly fragile. If you can't stop that decay, the machine becomes instantly useless because the data corrupts itself.
It just falls apart.
Exactly. But Dressler somehow mapped out the exact mathematical scaffolding to stop that decay in 1961. He perfectly mirrored the noise modeling frameworks used in quantum systems today. He solved incredibly complex hardware problems from 2026, submitted the math, and then vanished entirely from all official civil and census records.
So we have these physical objects, the scrolls, the letters, the mathematical equations that are clearly displaced. But here's where it gets really interesting. Looking through this stack of FBI files from 2003, we move from objects to actual people.
The accidental travelers.
Yes. There is an interrogation log here for a man named Andrew Carlson that just breaks the math of financial markets entirely. He walked into a Toronto FBI field office and calmly surrendered himself. Why? Because the regulatory agencies were hunting him after he turned an $800 investment into $350 million in exactly 2 weeks.
The numbers in the trading logs don't make sense because they are statistically impossible. He executed 126 consecutive, incredibly high-risk stock trades. He perfectly timed corporate accounting scandals, sudden mergers, and unpredictable market crashes. Financial analysts calculated the odds of doing that by pure chance at roughly 1 in 3 trillion.
Right, and when they got him in the interrogation room, he didn't ask for a lawyer. He calmly claimed he was a temporal refugee from the year 2256. To prove it, he predicted the exact date Saddam Hussein would be captured later that year and gave the precise geographic details and death toll of the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami long before any seismic activity occurred.
And he described our current technology to them.
He did. The interrogators noted he described everyday life using handheld touchscreen devices made of glass and metal and talked about social media platforms as if they were public utilities. Then he posts bail, walks out the door, and completely vanishes. But the detail that really gets me is the money.
The routing codes.
Yeah. The bank accounts holding his $350 million were systematically emptied and transferred to international routing codes that didn't correspond to any known modern banking system on Earth.
He essentially wired the funds to a financial infrastructure that hasn't been built yet. And Carlson wasn't the only case of human displacement that year. In 2003, medical officials in Santiago, Chile, took in a woman known only as Valentina.
The Santiago patient.
Exactly. She was found unconscious in a public park wearing clothing made from synthetic fabrics that couldn't be chemically identified. What's crucial here is the psychological assessment. The attending psychiatrist explicitly noted she did not exhibit the disorganized thought patterns of psychosis. Instead, he diagnosed her with cultural displacement.
She was perfectly rational, just utterly confused by the infrastructure of 2003. She sat in that hospital and drew these massive, highly technical maps of a 2026 version of Santiago. She charted out vertical agriculture towers, completely replacing rural supply chains, and mapped an AI-personalized public education framework that eliminated standardized testing entirely.
And then she vanished, too.
12 days into her psychiatric observation, walked out of the ward at 6:14 a.m., and vanished from every single closed-circuit security camera in the surrounding blocks.
It is fascinating that Valentina mapped out an AI-driven bureaucratic society in 2003. Because if we look at this Reddit archive from August 2017, a user named Chronosolin was describing the exact same concept.
The Reddit prophet.
Right. They posted on the platform for exactly 9 days before permanently deleting their account. They outlined a severe respiratory pandemic starting in late 2019, but they spent most of their time detailing the 2026 era of what they termed algorithmic governance.
Algorithmic governance, meaning the delegation of actual civic policy, legal sentencing, and resource distribution directly to AI systems, which is exactly the synthetic media regulation and automated governance debate currently active in our legislatures right now. And just to be clear, we're not taking sides on whether algorithmic governance is the right path or the wrong path, whether it removes human bias or creates unaccountable black boxes. We are just noting that this specific political debate is exactly what Swan described as a defining feature of 2026.
Precisely. But the linguistic analysis of Chronosolin's archive is what gives it weight. Forensic linguists found that the author consistently used past tense grammar to describe these future events. They weren't making wild speculative predictions. Structurally, the syntax showed they were recounting established memories.
So they were remembering it, not predicting it.
Yes. We see this linguistic hallmark of genuine temporal displacement throughout historical records. It's a sudden, jarring shift where individuals find themselves navigating the wrong era, like the incident with the Philadelphia train.
The 1950 train that went into a tunnel and arrived at Penn Station in 1975. The 178 passengers emerged 25 years later, completely unaged, and the transport manifest perfectly matched 146 missing persons reports filed in 1950.
Exactly. We also see it much earlier with the Green Children of Woolpit in 1887. They emerged from a deep cave system in England with green-tinted skin, speaking an evolved, heavily shifted descendant of the English language.
And their story of where they came from was wild.
They described their home as a twilight land lit by artificial suns, featuring automated machines and vast underground transport corridors. To a Victorian audience, it sounded like a fairy tale. To us, analyzing the data today, it sounds exactly like a future Earth where a ruined surface has forced humanity to retreat underground.
Okay, so this brings up the natural question you have to be asking yourself right now. How is this actually happening? We need to look at the mechanics. Because the source material doesn't just point to accidental slips through time. It points to a really dark, documented history of classified military experiments trying to force the door open. Let's look at the declassified files from the 1932 Liverpool experiment.
Dr. Nelson's work.
Yeah, Dr. Robert Nelson was running massive electromagnetic pulse tests in a warehouse. During a peak calibration, the resonance field essentially cracked, and the lab suddenly filled with people who had been pulled backward through time. One of them was a temporal physicist from the year 2089 named Dr. Sarah Chen.
The EM pulse had created an artificial gravity well that yanked her timeline into ours.
Exactly. She frantically sketched advanced electromagnetic diagrams on a chalkboard before the resonance field destabilized, and she literally faded away in front of the research team.
And that crude manipulation of electromagnetic fields evolved into something much more dangerous during the Second World War. When we examine the declassified OSS files on the Nazi Bell Project in 1944, we see the raw biological cost of these physics. The device utilized massive, counter-rotating cylinders filled with a highly classified violet mercury substance called Cerium-525.
The file explicitly mentioned that this Cerium-525 caused localized time dilation.
Right. To understand the dilation they experienced, imagine pressing fast forward on a VHS tape, but the effect is entirely contained within a 30-foot radius, and it only affects biological cells.
That sounds horrific.
It was. Scientists exposed to the active field of the bell aged years in a matter of minutes. The documents describe rapid cellular breakdown, essentially cooking their DNA through hyperaccelerated entropy. The project and the remaining prototypes vanished completely when Germany collapsed.
But the research didn't vanish. By the 1980s, the hardware evolved, and we see it surface in the Montauk Project logs from Camp Hero in New York. They weren't just spinning mercury anymore. They were using human consciousness as a targeting system. They built a device known as the Montauk Chair, heavily utilized by subjects like Duncan Cameron.
The Montauk Chair was designed to interface directly with the human central nervous system. It amplified human psychic patterns and converted them into physical directional electromagnetic fields. The goal was to allow for temporal viewing, essentially creating a periscope to look up and down the timeline.
But the human brain can't handle that.
No, the human mind is absolutely not designed to process multidimensional existence. Subjects strapped into the chair experienced severe temporal echoes. They felt their consciousness spread out, existing simultaneously across multiple timelines.
And the toll it took on them was immense.
The psychological toll was devastating. It drove many of the subjects completely mad, and the bioelectric strain caused their physical bodies to age at wildly irregular asymmetrical rates.
Which brings us to David, the Montauk witness. If we connect this to the bigger picture, in 1988, he walked into a Long Island newspaper office and sat down for a 4-hour interview. He was a low-level technician who claimed he didn't physically travel through time, but he routinely used this amplified EM technology to open a window to look specifically into the mid-2020s.
He was observing our current decade.
Yes. He accurately saw the year 2026. He described targeted photonic therapy being used to destroy disease cells without surgery, which is exactly what is hitting clinical trials right now. He described our transparent OLED displays and the early stages of autonomous vehicle corridors.
But if we look closely at David's testimony, his most profound observation wasn't technological at all, it was sociological. And this is perhaps the most vital insight for us today. He spent hours observing the human condition of 2026 through that temporal window.
And what he saw wasn't great.
No. He noted that despite the constant, invisible hum of these miraculous communication networks, the people he watched looked deeply isolated. He described a society surrounded by glowing screens, constantly connected to the invisible web the Kyoto monk warned about, yet visibly sad and profoundly disconnected from face-to-face reality. That was what disturbed him the most back in 1988. It wasn't the transparent screens or the autonomous cars. It was the suffocating loneliness of the timeline he was peering into.
So what does this all mean? That observation forces us to ask the ultimate question of this deep dive. We have out-of-place artifacts, we have desperate temporal refugees, and we have secret military experiments fracturing the timeline. But why are there so many incursions into our specific era? Why are there so many anomalous fingers pointing squarely at 2026?
This raises an important question about intent.
Right. When we cross-reference the established Roswell crash logs from 1947 with these newly unsealed deathbed testimonies from base nurses Miriam Bush and Adeline Sparks, the narrative shifts entirely from extraterrestrial to extratemporal.
The nurses' medical observations are highly specific. They stated unequivocally that the being recovered from the wreckage wasn't an alien. It was a genetically modified human from the late 21st century.
A future human.
Yes. The biological adaptations, the enlarged cranium, the eyes adapted to incredibly low-light environments, they suggest a species that had evolved away from the surface of the Earth.
And the device recovered from the craft didn't just project navigational star charts. It displayed temporal coordinates. The surviving entity communicated to the military personnel that they had experienced a temporal displacement malfunction during a historical research mission. They were surveying Earth's past. We see this exact same scenario play out in the 1998 Victor conspiracy video.
The interrogation video.
Yeah, which allegedly shows a heavily classified interrogation of a dying temporal agent who claimed to be from the year 2371. The entity spoke a highly evolved academic form of English and possessed the same low-light optical adaptations described by the Roswell nurses.
Synthesizing the testimony from the Victor video, the Svalbard file's cryptic mention of a transition period, and the Vienna letter's warning of verification paralysis, a grim, cohesive reality finally emerges. These beings, these future humans, are refugees from a ruined post-catastrophe Earth.
A timeline that went completely wrong.
Exactly. Whether it was the environmental collapse warned about in Svalbard or the global cyber conflict hinted at in the Kyoto Scroll, humanity was forced underground into the twilight land described by the Green Children. They developed time travel not for historical tourism, but out of desperate existential necessity. According to the temporal agent in the Victor video, they are actively traveling back to study our specific era to find intervention points. They are mapping the exact moments in our timeline where small, subtle nudges can prevent their catastrophic future from ever happening.
Which brings this entire massive web of evidence directly to you, listening to this deep dive right now. Why should you care about a Japanese scroll from 1638, or a guy who broke the stock market in 2003, or the psychological trauma of the Montauk technicians? Because the exact years these temporal anomalies explicitly warned about, the years they pinpointed as the tipping point of human history, are 2024, 2025, and specifically today, March 9, 2026.
Consider the digital and social reality you are navigating today. You are living through the exact crisis of authenticity the Edo period monk warned us about 4 centuries ago. You are seeing the AI, autonomous decisions, and synthetic media legislation that the Reddit prophet outlined.
It's all happening right outside our doors.
It is. You are experiencing the precise verification paralysis detailed in the Vienna letter. A society stuck in a hall of mirrors where even the exit signs are generated reflections. You aren't just listening to a fascinating compilation of time travel lore. You are actively living inside the exact temporal intersection that these desperate future humans came back to observe and alter.
It fundamentally changes how you look at the news. From the impossible crop predictions sitting on an offline server in the Arctic to the warnings of isolation from a 1980s radar base, the evidence suggests that the future has been screaming backward at us for centuries. Thank you so much for coming along on this deep dive into the source material. It is a massive amount of anomalous data to process, but understanding these historical incursions gives us a totally new, critical lens through which to view the daily chaos of our modern world.
And as we close this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final, unsettling concept to mull over on your own. If temporal agents from the year 2371 have been actively infiltrating our timeline for decades, desperately trying to identify intervention points to save humanity, wait, scratch that. If they've been trying to find these intervention points, and we are currently living through the exact AI disruptions, the algorithmic governance, and the profound social isolation they warned about, does that mean their temporal interventions failed? Or is it possible that the chaotic, overwhelming reality of 2026 that you are living in right now is actually the improved, fixed timeline?